How are you? Good to see you. We are officially at 2 o'clock, which is officially the time to go live. If you want to say hello in the chat, I'd love to know who's here. It's good to see everybody. Just say hey, give me a thumbs up. Let me know you're here. Wow, it's good to see everyone. Well, let's get started. If you don't already know me, I'm Coach Chris. I'm a certified high performance coach and martial arts instructor, brain injury survivor, world champion martial artist, kind of a nerd, and I love to talk to people about the things that I talk to my clients about in our coaching sessions. And today we're going to be thinking out loud about the idea of leading from presence instead of old rules. So, yeah. So I had a client that was talking to me recently about how they're still operating like they have no team, right? It was a new thing to start hiring some employees. It's always a big transition for small businesses. It's, hey, I'm finally ready for employees. And if you've been there and you've run your own show, you know that you really wear every single hat. And sometimes it feels like Bartholomew Covens with the 500 hats piled on top of you. And then sometimes when you finally get to having somebody who's working for you, you still don't know how to let go. Sometimes it's a matter of trust, and sometimes it's a matter of just not knowing how to delegate. I had one person say to me recently, well, I trained them, I did everything I was supposed to do, and they're making so many mistakes, they're making more work for me. And, there's a learning curve we sometimes forget about how we're going to switch into having this new thing. And so what I want to talk to you about today is kind of how like survival rules can carry over into a season of success. So if you think about, for a while, being on your own and being solo survival strategy. It's just, I'm starting out. But at some point, you hit that point where you really need to be hiring someone, but you're not ready to be hiring someone. You don't want to hire someone. You don't know how. And doing all of that work can feel overwhelming. And that's sort of when it starts feeling like survival. And so as you're learning to triage and just take care of everything, that becomes a survival pattern. And even as you move into a season of success where you can have somebody else, you're not necessarily able to let go. Another example of survival rules is I think I mentioned this last time in the last one as well. If maybe you've had a financial hard time in your business, where I think last time I talked about a client that had a bankruptcy in their background, and so the new rules ended up being don't spend what you don't need to spend. And just like that can influence our choices for ourselves and our business individually, it can also influence how we lead others. Always being worried about money, being very stressed, not trusting people's decisions. The things that happen from the past, they sometimes carry into the way we lead. And even if they aren't consciously above board in our leadership style, there's sometimes things that, how you're presenting yourself and then this other piece are inconsistent, and people pick up on that. So it's really important to learn to discern the difference between what got me here and who I am now, because we know that no matter what stage of the game we're at, the skills that got us this far aren't going to get us that far. There's always something to learn in between. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about martial arts or if we're talking about business or anything in between. Some examples of ways that the rules that we might carry forward from a solo into a group thing, or from a season of stress to a season of success, we'll call it that, might be I have to do everything myself. Or it could swing the other way, and I'm totally available. I have to be available if my new staff has questions, and then they're not new anymore. But you've set up this, not just an open door, but a revolving door, which is wonderful on one hand because you're great communication, but on the other, I don't know about you, but I don't do terrifically well with being interrupted. It takes me a few minutes to get back and find my place. I have a friend who has this problem, who is completely interruptible all of the time. There's no system or process for getting her time. And so she's always available to her team and her boss. And she never gets her work done because she's always putting out everybody else's fires. And so that can also be a problem. One of the rules that we carry forward is I have to be available all the time. I had a recent conversation with someone who said, if I'm really, really honest, they're an owner, a business owner, and they were stressed out about their profit margin shrinking. Even though their gross income's way up this year, the profit margin's shrinking. And I said, well, what does your P&L look like? They hadn't looked at it yet. They've pushed back on this before. So I asked, well, like, what's that about? And she said, honestly, I don't really fully understand it. Okay, well, who's somebody you could ask for help? Well, probably my accountant, but I'm supposed to know everything. I can't ask my accountant. I need somebody else who can help me. So, which is why she came to me, so I could help her out with that. But like that idea of asking for help, just because you're the owner doesn't mean you can't ask for help. That's why we develop teams. And a well-rounded team has people with skills that are different than yours, so that you have people specifically that you can ask questions of. So it's probably a good thing if you do. Another one is, another idea is if I slow down, everything's going to collapse. I have a friend who's a realtor. She's a third or fourth generation realtor, and her son is just now old enough to join the family business, although on the opposite side of the country. And she was telling me the other day how she's listening to what he's doing, and she says, I think he's creating extra work because he's stressed and he's looking for things to do. And she said, I think he might have learned that from me, because I know I do that, but I still want to kind of reach out and see if I can redirect him now while it's not too late, which I thought was such a great instinct on her part, wanting to help redirect him, right? But that idea of we have to do more, and if we pause and take a break, things are going to fall apart. These are things that at some point probably were rules that were really protective and really worked at the time that we formed them. I can think of a lot of times when each of those rules that I just gave you were things that I needed it to be that way in my business. When I first started having assistants on the mat at the martial arts studio, well, for one, they were young because I was raising my students into instructors. But they were all new at what they were doing. And so I had to be, in the very beginning, available to help them out and give them guidance on what they were doing. But as things grew and the classes got bigger, if I had to be available to help the instructors, I wasn't helping anybody else. And so we had to come up with systems and figure out how to move that. So really the question that comes up is, they worked then, they were protective then. Are they still protective now, or are they limiting now? And that's really the curiosity that you want to start approaching this with, because there's nothing wrong with it. It's just you don't want to have old rules following new seasons, because when that happens, you end up on autopilot, and you might be efficient, but you also might be disconnected. And as I mentioned earlier, your team might feel that contradiction, and it might feel to them like you don't trust them, even though that's not the message you intend to be giving. Your stress and your holding, they're grasping from the past, and your misalignment can feel like it's personal to them. Another thing that happens when we have old rules running these new seasons is we get exhausted. I mean, this is one of the things that happens with burnout. Even though you have good metrics, if you're running from the patterns that developed to protect you from when you didn't have good metrics, you're not giving yourself the space that you've earned. And then the hardest thing I think that can happen is you end up crossing your own values to keep things working. And that's always a shame. When I have a client who says the most important thing to me is having time for my family, I want to be a good role model to my kids. I want them to see that having a business equates to freedom, and then they spend all their time at the business and they don't make time for their family, or they make time for their family, like technically, but they're so burned out and exhausted by the time they get there that it's no fun for anybody. So when we get stuck in these old patterns, instead of moving forward into the leadership of who we are now, and right when we lack the clarity of the difference between now and then, there's a cost to it, and that cost could be what I was just talking about with that example of not being available. I can speak, not being available for your family. You're trading presence for performance. That can be presence at home, or it could be presence on the job, but that's one of the costs. And it can also be self-betrayal disguised as responsibility. I know for me, I had a season where I was so busy. I was working on so many different projects that I had promised to other people that I kept putting myself last and my business last. And I am not that kind of person generally. I don't see myself as, oh, everybody comes first. I see myself as a little bit, I consider myself somebody who has good boundaries, but I noticed at one point in this season that everybody else's projects came before mine. I had made a commitment. I had promised them. They were counting on me. And I didn't think about the fact that I had promised myself and I was counting on me. But I was in this period of, in this season of my life where I had to get the bills paid. And so these projects really did matter and they were important. It just, my stuff was less important. And as I moved out of that, and as I had more time for my own, it really was a struggle in the beginning. It was a transition I had to become very conscious of and create very hard boundaries for myself in order to say, no, this is my time for me. This project will get done tomorrow, but this today is my time. This is building my business, showing up for my clients. And so, you can have that self-betrayal. And it's important to learn the warning signs, because there are early warning signs if you're paying a cost, right? I'm asking you to be curious and to consider, is this work still working for me? Is this a habit that I don't need anymore? And part of how you know that is to learn yourself, right? For me, some of the early warning signs that I was not in alignment, that I was not functioning from my best interest, is procrastination, distraction, getting snippy with people. Those are kinds of things that are warnings of like some energy is in the wrong place. And so what I really want to encourage you to do is to just start noticing, right? Step one is going to be noticing where you are and what's going on and looking for these signs. So it might be tuning into your body. Are you feeling tension in your chest? Are you holding things in your shoulders or your head? Are you having, can you notice your posture? Just really taking some time and doing like a full body scan and seeing where is there tension and using that as data. Also really learning to become present in the moment, and try to discern if it's presence or if it's rule following. Let me see if I can give you an example of that. And some of you are like, rule following. I'm not a rules person, right? I'm a rules-based processor. I generally, like, I have my rhythm, I have my thing, and I have rules that help me manage, especially after the brain injury, after the last concussion. I had to develop rules like, ooh, this one's a hard one. Presence versus rule following. Okay, so the rule might be that if I sit down to work, oh, this is a really good one. I use Pomodoros. Okay, the Pomodoro timer is 25 minutes on, 5-minute break, 25 minutes on, 5-minute break. That's a half hour. We repeat that, and then like a 15-minute break later on. And it's good because it's taught me to work to time and not to task, because I get time blind. That's part of how I have boundaries problems between different projects. And so, the rule is focus for 25 minutes, don't get distracted. But presence includes a text from a friend and discerning whether or not they need me right now. Instead of, oh no, absolutely no texts, I'm in the zone, being willing to say, hey, is this urgent on the text? And if they say no, okay, let me catch you when I'm out of my work block, right? Or also being present enough to know what's going on with my husband or my cat or whatever's happening in the family, even though I'm working. So I have my rules about when I work and when I do other things, but that presence allows flexibility. And I think that's another way to kind of tune in and see what's where. And it's really important to remember, as I mentioned before, like tuning into your body knows first. If you get good at tuning into how you're feeling and trusting that information, your body really does know first. So the first step is noticing and being curious. And then the next step would be updating your rules because you want to be able to move forward into this. And so the updating, you have to, you're really looking at the curious question of, is this a season? Is this now or from a season that's past, right? And so remembering some rules serve and some need revision. And just, we've got to be able to see it first, but then you do want to be able to make shifts in it. And so I'm thinking about this as today we're talking about leading and how we show up for others. And it's easy when we're in a space of crisis to get very tunnel vision and want to really focus on yourself. And when you're coming out of that, especially if you're interacting with other people, right? Because leadership is not only about who I am as a boss. Leadership is also about who I am as a spouse, as a parent, as a sibling, as a friend. Leadership is being a role model. Leadership is taking other people into consideration, right? It's really about all of our interactions with other human beings and how do we show up and what are we bringing into the world. And so when you've either been in a season that had to condense or you were in a great season, but now you're in a new one and it's a level up, you need to consider, how am I still going to show up for people? What needs to change? That's really what I'm talking about, right? So when you notice, am I present or am I rule following? The next question is this rule still valuable now? Or is it a season that's passed? And the ones that work now, hey, keep them. If they're from a season that's past, honor them and maybe not just let them go, but ask yourself, what about this rule needs to change? So again, I'm thinking about this in terms of someone who goes from being maybe a manager to a director, or from a director to a VP, and your role changes. I remember asking a boss once, these roles changed a lot for people in tech. Back in the 90s when I worked in tech, they had only recently figured out that some developers don't want to be managers. They like the coding and they like the developing, and they learned they had to create different paths. But I remember asking my manager, what did you do before? Because he managed a team of developers, so he clearly had developer experience. And I asked him, what do you like or not like about your job now? And he said he sometimes missed the coding, but he actually really liked the collaboration. He liked the high level planning. He liked needing to keep track of all of the things that he kept track of so that we could just do our work. And he just made things easier for us. And so he had to learn how to adjust. And so if you take the, I got to get this done before I can deal with anything else mentality when you were an individual contributor or a manager that sometimes had projects, like, right, go from being a project manager to a people manager, that mentality of the work comes first, it needs to shift and it needs to open up, but it needs to happen in a way that actually works for you. And I think that's where sometimes people get disconnected and have trouble. So we're almost done. I got a couple minutes left on the time here, but I just, in closing, I want you to remember that what you're doing when you're looking at this, right? So the invitation still stands of really looking at, how are you showing up for people? How are you showing up as a leader? And is it working for you now? Remember, don't get lost in the past. This isn't so much excavating all the whys and the hows and the stuff in the back, not from a negative point, but this is more design work. This is more just looking at, where am I? How is still where I want to be, or do I need to shift it? And also be kind to yourself, because we adapt to survive. So if you had a toxic workplace and you got really quiet and you don't share your ideas and now you're learning to speak up, with other people and to trust other people again. I honor that silence, that holding in from that other workplace, because that was important to you and it really helped you. Um, and then really move forward and look at, is this adaptation, if I don't need this adaptation anymore, how do I lead from who I am now and for the environment I'm in now? And really, it's about leading with presence. It's about knowing who you are, where you're at, what's needed around you, and not just running on autopilot from your old patterns, which is sometimes easier said than done, because autopilot comes from something and it matters. And unlearning whatever that was can be really challenging and is really important to do. So I hope you found that valuable and I hope it was useful. If you'd like to check in with me about any of the ideas at any time, you can find me on my website. All that information is down below in the comments. I'm supposed to go like this, right? Anyway, happy Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in and have a great rest of your day. How do I turn this off? Oh, yeah, the hardest thing is figuring out how to end. There it is, end stream. Take care, y'all.